Because agility is really weird in baseball too. Like if you watch some of like the best defenders, let's just say like you're watching like your middle infielders, rarely when they field the ball are they coming to like this exact stop position. A lot of times it's so fast that, it's like one fluid motion. They're fielding, turning, getting that ball out of the glove and letting it go. They're not like coming to a complete break. So I think that's where, as in things that I look at, from an order of what we really want to work on and how much of the volume that we have. Baseball doesn't require like a ton of agility, in that sense. And, I think it actually, like for me, it more so comes down to like a mobility standpoint.
That was physical preparation coach Pat Trainor speaking on the nuances of agility development in baseball. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by SimpliFaster. SimpliFaster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from SimpliFaster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that SimpliFaster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at SimpliFaster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from SimpliFaster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by SimpliFaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Welcome to episode 130 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Thanks for tuning in today, and we have on the show Coach Pat Trainor, who is currently the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator for the Tampa Bay Rays. I was actually recommended Pat. I kind of threw out a question on Instagram or Facebook, I forget, but on who you guys would like to see on the show. And Pat was one of the guys who was recommended. I'd never heard of him, so I reached out to him. And I can definitely say in talking with Pat, even just like the first little preliminary phone call we had, I'm like, man, this guy really, if you look at like all the little silos that exist, you have strength and conditioning, you have sports medicine, you have the skill coaches, you have sports science, you have all these things. Like Pat is so good at managing and building relationships and context within all these silos and creating a system that is really special for his players. I'm not like super familiar with baseball in some senses. Like I'll be the first to say I have no experience training baseball players outside of putting together a program for the crew at Wilmington College. I'm fascinated by the biomechanics of like hitting and swinging and throwing. I think a Darien bar just got me obsessed with those. But in terms of actually going into baseball, I don't have a lot, and we haven't covered that on the show. So I was really thrilled to have Pat on the show today, as well as Pat's a guy who, as a pro strength coach, and the more pro strength coaches I talk to, the more I start to understand the context and the bandwidth that they create in looking at each player as an individual with different needs. Not everyone's all the same. Obviously, you can't go into the situation and just say, max strength for everybody. I'm going to get you as strong as I can and send you on your way and all will be well. There's a whole lot more that goes into that. So Pat is really... So Pat's the man with that stuff. He really goes into things as well on the show today, not only with like what you were talking about with agility, or what he was talking about with agility development before, and the nuances of baseball, and actually his mobility assessment, which he got cut off there. He's going to share with it later. Reminds me a lot of like Jay Schrader. Basically, build the physical capacities and they will come. Which is really cool. And he's going to get into the trade-off of skills that is baseball. It's almost like baseball is almost like a little bit of a decathlon, if you will. You can get hitting power and get a little bigger and stronger, but maybe it impacts your defense. So he's really going to go into this grand scheme of how he works with the skill coaches to make the to make the program work in the direction of the player as best it can. He's going to go into how he approaches maximal strength. Some athletes definitely need to get stronger and need to put on mass, and it works out awesome for them. But some players don't, and what do you do in those situations? He's going to talk about the importance of the feet in baseball, some differences in Latin American players, because they get a lot of Latin American players coming in. How are they physically different than the United States players? Which the answer may surprise you actually a little bit. And finally, he's going to get into speed and agility training and his system and ideas on that. So it was really cool to get some pro baseball talk on the show. I learned an awful lot and just really enjoying talking to Pat, who's just an awesome mind in the world of pro baseball. So excited to get you guys this show. So that being said, let's get started with episode 130 with Pat Trainor. I was curious a little bit about your background. Like, what sports did you play? Like, what led you into baseball?
You know what? It's kind of funny because I grew up in a very small town in southern New Jersey, and the main sports that you played was football in the fall and you wrestled in the winter, and then spring trained. Actually, I don't even know if my high school had a baseball team. Maybe my freshman year, it wasn't really big, and I played those sports through high school. I ended up going to college at West Virginia University. Did my undergrad there in exercise physiology, and essentially through that whole, kind of like undergrad, I was geared towards like going to PT school. I wanted to work in like the rehab setting, and I would do all kinds of volunteering at different clinics in the West Virginia Morgantown area. There was an aquatic therapy program, in within the exercise physiology department. So, I would do stuff with, essentially PT, but in a pool. So. My senior year, I went to go do an internship, and that was kind of when I got introduced more into like the athletic realm. And I was like, I saw one work, and I was like, oh yeah, this is I think something that I like to do. So baseball kind of was just more of like an opportunity almost. Like when I graduated college, I was looking for work, and I ended up starting off at like a private training center who had a contract with St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. So I essentially was a head strength conditioning coach without the official title from the university, overseeing, I think there was like 14 or 15 sports at the time that I oversaw. And after about like a year and a half, I was just like, let me see what else is out there. And, I saw baseball, they have postings like every year. And, I applied, sent in my resume, ended up interviewing for one, got hired. And, 10 years later, I'm still in baseball. And that's like a big thing. A lot of guys, they always ask me that. Well, like, when did you stop playing? I was like, I don't know. Like, I played like Little League, when I was 12 years old, and it kind of presented itself as an opportunity early in my career, and I was fortunate enough to get that opportunity and have a little bit of success, and like I said, here I am 10 years later.
Yeah, I think I stopped at like 12. Baseball is like my favorite sport until whenever that strike was in like the mid 90s where all the players went on strike.
Yeah, the exact same.
Yeah, that did it in for me. I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm tall, move on to basketball. But baseball was my thing until then. And it's interesting. It's interesting how sports come back. I work with swimming now, and it's like I don't tell a lot of people, like I did swimming until I basically failed. They failed me at like level 3 of the swim lessons because I couldn't do the butterfly right. And then that was it. I was like, okay, I guess I'm not cut out for this. I can hold my breath underwater a long time, but that doesn't really count for much of anything. So
yeah.
So that's cool. Yeah, it's like you think about too, like how people get into the profession, right? Like I was in exercise science, and it's like when you're in that degree, it's like, oh yeah, you could do cardiac rehab, you could do physical therapy. Like everyone kind of has that physical therapy moment. I feel like and I was pursuing it at least until I had the idea of it until I actually shadowed a physical therapist, and I'm like, this is kind of boring. Like, I mean, it can be awesome if you're in a practice where it can't, you make it awesome, and depending on how you're approaching things. But I was like, I couldn't do this. So,
yeah, the setting that I was in was a lot of more like, children and like the geriatric population, people with disabilities. It wasn't more so like rehabbing athletes, and it was like, man, like this is, it's great what you're doing to help these people, but at the same time, that was kind of all I knew. And like I said, I heard that our strength conditioning department, was they do internships every year. And I remember like going down and watching one of the workouts was like the first thing. And I was like, the music cranked up on the weight room. And I was like, oh yeah, this is the environment I need to be in. I actually, finished up all the hours I need to get it in the rehab, realm of things. And I didn't go back. I stayed with that, that aspect of the exercise phys program, throughout the duration.
Yeah, I was an athletic training sports medicine major for 2 years. And this shows how little like aspirations I had when I was 18, but like, because basically my dad decided that would be something I'd be interested in, so he signed me up for it. And then I got to school, and some of the seniors like, oh, athletic training's so awesome, you're gonna love it. And I had like literally, because I had to have a requisite amount of hours like to graduate or be certified. And I by the time I quit my sophomore year, I definitely had the least amount of hours by far of everybody else, just because I didn't like being in there. Like I wanted to work out and be around people who are working out. And so it's interesting how those opportunities present themselves. So Pat, with what you're doing now, like, and so in your position, and I just think it's really cool, everything you have at your disposal, what you're doing. And I think a big part of the field now is kind of this thing about transfer and infusing, not being in your silo, and infusing skills from different realms together. But what's your take on infusing the work that you're doing in physical preparation with your skill coaches to give the players their best shot, their best experience?
Yeah, I think kind of like what you talked about with, as far as transfer of training, I think that, far too often in the physical preparation, strength and conditioning realm, and kind of like the evolution of the position and facilities that surrounded it, we kind of almost, you put the system itself put us in these silos. And, it is great to have expertise in all of the departments, from the medical side to the skill side, physical preparation side, because it does enhance the level of knowledge within that. But I think it's easy to get too far, kind of stuck in your realm. And ultimately, as physical preparation coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, our job is a support staff for the athletes to improve their sport performance, regardless of what that sport is. In field court sports, it's tough because you don't have like this one variable that you can point to and says that's what made this guy better. Like him squatting this is what made him, hit 300. It's very far from that. And that's the tough part, I think, about, being, working in our realm in field court sports, is that sometimes guys tend to, because of that, they tend to put themselves in that, number chasing area, and, and only worry about things that they're doing in the weight room or, out on the field, with conditioning and speed work. And those things all have its place, and it's great. But I think a large portion of what we need to do is have like a really good communication with our skill coaches, field staff, technical, tactical coaches. Because, going back to, like I didn't play baseball growing up, and by no means am I an expert hitter. So I really rely on our, and baseball relies on hitting coaches. They may have lacked, knowledge in physiology and, developing athleticism. So, us having conversations, consistently is what helps kind of drive, I think, our programs overall, versus getting caught up of what we do in the weight room. We saw his vertical jump go up. Is that always going to be, like directly translating to any improvement performance on the field? I mean, yeah, sure. You can say a guy may be a little bit faster if he's got a higher vertical jump, a little bit more power output. But, like looking at golf, I like to know what like Tiger Woods, vertical jump is. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, these guys are great athletes, but there's a point where that transfer isn't 100%. So I think having the communication with, your field staff, your skill coaches is essentially integral in, driving that performance of the athlete. And, I think in baseball, kind of in my realm, we have these meetings on players, a couple times a year where we go over essentially like our roster, everybody in our organization, and, what can we do? What does this player need to get better? And I think a lot of times, like, you will hear things like, oh, he needs to get stronger. He needs more agility. That's always a fun one. He needs to gain mobility. and you'll hear like a lot of these like broad things that could mean anything. And I think sometimes it's easy to kind of just, put the headphones in and say, yeah, he needs more agility. I'll take care of it. But I think if you really listen to it and you start to take note, like, let's start to dig. The game of baseball doesn't involve, the example of agility, it doesn't involve a ton of agility work. So when I hear a staff member say this guy needs more agility, I'm thinking, okay, there's probably some type of deficiency in his defensive ability, and it's probably something to do with more so first step quickness, and more of like an acceleration, deceleration versus, what would be like typical agility, maybe in like lacrosse or American football. So it's like, okay, well, I don't really need to take this guy through cone drills and through agility ladder drills. Like, let's figure out what's going on with this player. Is it movement that he lacks? Is it motor patterns, or maybe just, mobility, the ability to contract, relax, like having rhythm? Is it, levels of, his ability to overcome his own inertia and gravity and accelerate out? Is it reaction time and maybe more of like a game knowledge? Like maybe their visual acuity isn't that great, or their ability to react to, a stimulus isn't as fast. So those are things that as a strength coach, physical preparation coach, you have to listen to, because, they play a huge role in us helping these players reach their full physical potential.
Oh, right on. I like when you brought up like vertical jump, and this is somewhere that I've gone, especially in the last year or two, as I think I made that break. I mean, probably almost 10 years ago, where I'm like, okay, just because your squat went up doesn't mean your vertical went up. And to me, the vertical is like this holy grail of general power. And in some extent it is, but like I've certainly been realizing more and more where just because you jump higher doesn't mean you're going to swing better. Like there's serious distinctions in all these skills. It was funny, we had, I mean, and I'm not, I work with tennis, so there's like, and I've really tried to been digging into the rotational elements of things, and I wasn't a big baseball player. I like going to the driving range for golf, but nothing kind of reminded me of this more. There was like a staff home run derby at work a couple weeks ago, and I go on, I'm gonna hit a home run or something, but like and it's funny because all I do is golf. Like I can only hit low pitches. Like anything above, I'll just whiff like terribly. And doing the podcast with David Donatucci, I was like kind of understanding why based off of what type of athlete I'm at. But you see these people go out to hit, and they don't look like physically imposing at all. Like they could really do much athletically. But then, I mean, they can hit, and I'm watching like the way their left foot like really supinates, and they're almost like winding it back before they weight shift in this pronation. Like they have the skill down of hitting. It's amazing. And how once you get beyond this certain level of athleticism and general ability, the skills is where it's at. And it does demand a finer attention to detail, and as well as like you were saying, more than just agility, because like, well, what is that, right? Like there's so many. I almost feel like it'd be cool to have, and maybe there is this article out there, probably is. I think I've actually seen, I think there was a tweet, it was like Sophia Nymphius had this presentation on it, but like all the things that go in to change a direction, it's pretty substantial, like you were just saying, like all the things that it could be with your players.
Yeah, I think, you going back to the vertical jump thing, like by no means do I dismiss that as like a valuable measurement of power, because we do use that, as part of one of our assessments, but you have to be really careful about how you evaluate that and how it pertains to, every individual athlete. Because sure, we do have some guys that are very, athletic and rank very high within our organization that happen to throw hard and happen to hit hard, but there are also guys on the other end of the spectrum that are on the bottom of that, that assessment of vertical jump that can still do those things. A pitcher can still throw 90 miles per hour, and guys can still have some power in their swing. So it's an assessment that helps, but I think, like I said, in baseball being such a skill sport, you have to be, you still have to be open-minded and can't be closed off to what you do from the weight room or from the medical side in the training room. Even with like your mobility screenings, it's like how much mobility do we really want to gain? Or maybe some of that mobility is what allows that guy to have that skill set. So, maybe our goal isn't to have everybody fit in this one category of, joint centration, perfect mobility, but maybe it's like, hey, let's just make sure that this guy doesn't continue to trend in that negative direction, or really have something that we, think may cause some issues elsewhere down the line. And so I mean, it's a very broad spectrum of things, and I think the more that we can communicate with our, skill coaches to have that, essentially like that next pair of eyes that says, hey, like, he may be doing this, this, and this, but this is what I see. And again, that's where as a strength conditioning professional as well, our assessments do kind of help out, because sometimes a coach may say, hey, this guy is he needs to work on his speed and acceleration, or his first step quickness, and we're like, well, by our means of acceleration through our assessments, this guy actually ranks like top 10 in the organization, so maybe that's where we need to look at, hey, maybe he's not getting good reads on the pitcher, and that's why he's not getting a lot of stolen bases, or maybe he's just not making attempts in the games because that situation hasn't arisen, or maybe there's something else to it. Without that communication between departments and between staff, a lot of things can kind of go left unnoticed. And unfortunately in this game, there's new people knocking at the door every year. There's another draft, there's new guys signed, we have a ton of new players coming over from Latin America, so the shelf life of players, sometimes they don't get these huge opportunities, and we need to make the largest impact that we can have possible, essentially in that short time frame that we have.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by SimpliFaster. Yeah, I have another kind of a follow-up question for you, but before I get to it, I'm going to forget it. How do the Latin American players, how do they compare to the American players coming in? I mean, I don't think the Latin American have the typical, right, strength and conditioning the American do, but they probably, I guess you'd think they probably play more, or they're more well-rounded, or go barefoot, like that type of vibe. Is there substantial physical differences between the different players you get?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, obviously there's some things that, in the United States, just our traditional, schooling system, in the Dominican Republic, a lot of these kids come into our academies at 16 years old. So, they start playing baseball as a way of life, probably younger. And we think that, specialization is becoming this issue in the United States. Well, these kids from like 12 years old, 10 years old, maybe even younger, that's all they're doing. And when these kids come over to the United States at 16, 17, 18, sometimes they're a little bit more refined on the baseball side, because all they have been doing is playing games. But they've also, and a lot of times and I'll say, from the Dominican Republic, I see it more because all they play is baseball. They'll fall into some, I'll call them like motor learning deficiencies, essentially, where I've seen guys playing at like AA, AAA that if you ask them to stand on one foot, they would struggle, or do like a box step up or a lunge, and they look like they're getting ready to fall over. And it's like, oh God, but you watch a ground ball get hit to them, and it's like flawless, how their hands move and how they move their feet around the ball. So, I think more of the differences is that they play the game versus, falling into more of what, traditional physical education systems look like. In Dominican Republic, I assume it's not as prevalent, because these kids, are going to our academies at 16 years old, and playing baseball. You know what I mean? And it's pretty much year round. I mean, they get a few weeks each, or a month or two each year where they'll go home, where it's no baseball, but the majority of the time they are at our academies, and under our supervision with training. So it's I'll say, like, the vertical jump, like things like assessments like that we use, a lot of these guys don't even know how to jump. So some of their numbers are actually a lot lower when they first come over, and it's like, oh my God, man, like this guy can't jump at all. But if you watch him, if you just see the number, you'd be like, oh man, 20 inches? Like, what is this guy doing, But then if you actually watch these kids jump, some of them, they've never been taught to even jump. So like, they get their feet really wide, and they're looking up at the Veritech that we'll use and trying to figure out like where they need to touch. And I mean, there's also, it's like a learning curve to the assessment itself. So that's something that we try to we keep that in mind when we do those assessments, and that's something that we work on from when kids come into those academies at 16 years old, is just like very basic movements, pattern skills. You know what I mean? Like, basic running drills, very basic lifting, body weight stuff, teaching guys just how to land from jump. So a lot of the stuff is, I mean, what you would do if you were working with like a high school kid, in the United States. And that's essentially like the age range that we deal with for the most part.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess for some reason I would have thought like someone coming from a country of less means, like maybe they were like playing more as kids, so that just playing like different like kid games or something like that, like that maybe they would be more well-rounded. But it is, I guess, if that's like the culture though, the way of life, like you grow up and you play baseball, I'm sure you'd run into that.
Yeah, they'll play baseball in the streets with like bottle caps and stuff. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like that's like the games that they play as kids. I mean, I don't know if soccer is really big for the most part. I don't think that many guys play or football over there. In the youth, I think baseball is kind of in the Dominican Republic is what drives that. In Venezuela, we have some players come from over there, and they play some other sports, and it's a little bit different sometimes. From what I've noticed, some athletes that come from Venezuela tend to move a little bit better, from like the basic type things that we're talking about, basic movement patterns. I think that, so it definitely differs, country to country, but I think, those kids, man, if you go over there, you go into a neighborhood full of poverty, and the kids are out in the streets playing, baseball with a stick and like some bottle caps. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Actually, I was there when I was 5, and one of my few memories, it was just in an urban area that I stayed, and I remember kids playing with like a stick, trying to hit bottle caps with a stick. Like
Yep.
it's like the ultimate Rocky training for baseball, that kind of vibe. But the reason I ask, I'm not trying to like hijack the conversation in the sense, but I like that we quantify. You hear all the time, oh, the United States is behind in math or something. Finland's like kicking our ass or whatever, and I'm like, well, how do you quantify physical education? That's what I'm just kind of like interested in, the physical competencies that these different cultures kind of present with as they kind of go through. And so just an interest of mine.
Yeah.
But so before I forget too, before I get off tangent too much, I think it's interesting what you said, that we as physical preparation coaches have a different set of eyes with sports skills. It's like we're not the sport coach, but I think it is interesting the things that we are equipped with, our ability, whether it be, I guess you could say, joint by joint perspective, stability, instability, or mobility, or anything like that. And one of my big things is the feet too, that I'm getting into. Like, how are your feet interacting the ground, and how is that impacting everything up the chain? I think it's really cool, especially if the two coaches can work together well. If the egos can get lowered, and I think the output can be really solid. But I definitely think it takes people who are willing to interact with each other to do that well.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I know you brought up the feet too. I always say, like, one of the physical assessments that we're missing out on is when everybody comes in the spring. We need, hey, take your shoes off.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need like, because I mean, there's a lot of guys that come in that have some issues, and some you can say that it starts from the ground up, and there's definitely, that's like one of those things that's kind of like untapped on, that I think would be probably something very interesting to look at. I've heard some of your talks on with different guys on that nature, and it's definitely a very interesting topic that I like to dig a little bit more into as well.
Yeah. I'm just curious. I mean, that's why I'm doing all these talks with people and starting to try to attempt to figure some things out. I'm starting to dip my toes with some of my tennis guys, and like the idea, I need to watch a lot of video too, like to see, because how a baseball player hits is like, there's a million ways you can hit a tennis ball. You can be going into it, going away from it while hitting it, and I'm just like, how do I even start with all this process? But I've kind of noticed the people who have a hard time like getting into the ground and using and lateralizing their foot once it is on the ground have a harder time with a solid like swing. But it's taken me, it's a long process, but it is, that being said, it's exciting. I'm excited to see where people go with the information that's out there that the experts have presented, and I think it's really powerful. I think it's really cool that, the idea of, okay, you report to camp, right? Let's see what everyone's feet look like, and how you can do these different things. It's where it starts. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Like I said, you see collapse arches, and guys look like feet's pronating in, and it's like, man, like there's got to be something that we can do to start there before we're worried about how much how much weight you're picking off the ground or how fast you're running. So,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Right on. Yeah. And so, yeah, with weight picking up off the ground too. Well, a kind of a dual-headed question. Well, first, I know you've gotten to a point, even before we jumped on this podcast, we were just talking about, some athletes with different needs and what different players are going to be helped by. But first off, what's your journey been with max strength? I think when we first get into the industry, depending on who our mentors were, there's often that. That max strength, just push the maxes for everybody. That's our job, and then I think we kind of learn down the line which attitude is best for different players and different needs. But how has your journey been in that regards? And then how are you kind of putting strength in context now with how you approach developing it in your players?
Yeah, I think, early in my career, I kind of was in that, that mindset that strength rules all. And, if we can have a guy that's, as strong as possible, that's going to kind of carry over to, a lot of the other athletic abilities. And to a degree, like I said, there is some truth in that. And this is where I say, like, you got to put things in context because the majority of the athletes that we work with in baseball may not be, these extremely like type 2 explosive athletes. Some of them may actually be very undertrained or not trained at all because they're at such a young age. So, I think it all has to have some type of context to it. With our younger population of guys coming in, if guys have never worked out before, I think they're definitely, you will see like some immediate short-term, improvements in their performance or just their ability to train for the sport. I was at a TPI conference a couple weeks ago and they were talking about, it's like golf, it's a sport where they have like so many max effort hits during the competition. And then how do they train for it? You go to a driving range and you're just hitting buckets of balls and like, that's not necessarily the game, but baseball is very similar, meaning that, a player may only take, from a hitting perspective, so many swings in a game, but in order for him to, maximize that skill of hitting, like you have to take repetitions. And, we need to train athletes to be able to handle the practice workloads, essentially. So not just necessarily game, but actually, the practice for their competition. So I think some of our younger athletes will have some really short-term benefits from increasing strength. And, once we get to a certain level that we deem, is good enough for that individual, we start to transition into, like I said, more of they essentially go into another bucket, where now maybe we put a big focus on mobility or their power output or speed or mechanics. And maybe we dig a little bit deeper into like the mobility and things like that. But there are many roads to Rome, as the saying goes. And it's like, you have to have everything in context, I guess I would say. I think increasing max strength will have some short-term gains with some players. Some players, it may not help at all because they may already be at a higher level of play and they've done something for a certain, length of their career. And, it's kind of tough to come in and, go to a major league guy that's been playing 6 or 7 years at the highest level and say, hey, I think if you started deadlifting or, back squatting, it's going to take your game to a whole nother level. Like this guy's already made millions of dollars. He's already, put in half of a career, if not, more than what most people achieve. So it's like, that's where you kind of, things have to go in context and you have to find other means that are going to help keep that player healthy, one, and, maybe have some slight improvements in performance just from their ability to recover better, I would say. So, absolute strength is great in that sense, that, maybe it may cause some direct changes, but it's not for everybody. I mean, you look at world-class sprinters and some of them are really dominant in the weight room and some of them, it's just an accessory, I love like the comparison of like Ben Johnson and Carl Lewis, you know what I mean? Like body types, completely different. Like those are the types of things that as a physical preparation coach, you should take in with every athlete. I mean, the variety of athletes that we have in general, outside of just the position specific, like just body types. Like there are so many ways of going about training to achieve like a goal of increased performance without saying, you need to pick up 600 pounds. Some guys, and when I say pick up 600 pounds on the floor, that's like the upper end. You don't see that too often with a lot of players that we have in our organization. I mean, once a guy gets to like 2 times his body weight, sometimes that may be tough for guys. So it's like, okay, this guy's playing at like AA, AAA, major league level, and he's not very dominant in the weight room, but he's still playing at the highest level. So, you have to have that separation to be able to say, this isn't always the answer. I guess that's kind of my thought on how I view it within our organization. And it could change, year to year, depending on the players that we draft, depending on the off season that players have. Sometimes guys, like we get a guy to a point where we deem he's like really physically fit. His strength numbers through his workouts were really good. His speed numbers are good. His mobility is good. The season ends. He had some success that season. The season ends, and he shows up, February 15th or March 1st for spring training. And it's like, man, what happened to you? It's like, yeah, I got big, right? Like, like he's thinking he got jacked. And it's like, man, like the body composition showed you went up, like 5 or 6%, and your speed power numbers are down. And I'm more concerned about your work capacity and being able to handle this load in spring. So, I think it's all in context. It changes, year to year, player to player, and you just have to maintain that thought process, because it's very easy to, like I said, as a physical preparation coach, you get stuck chasing numbers, and it's not always the answer.
Yeah, it's really amazing how different the standard can be across the board, right? Like you were saying with Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson, and this. I remember the podcast I did with Brian Mann. I think it was the podcast I did with him where he was talking about athletes who are a little bit more ectomorphic, just don't have as much natural muscle mass, just don't have the tolerance for the same volume in the weight room that athletes who are more mesomorphic and endomorphic do, and just knowing which medicine to give each athlete and what dose. There's such a skill to it, right? But I like what, and this is actually, you and I were talking before this podcast about just like some of those players you were saying who do need to just improve that general strength and gain weight and build a little more general horsepower, and the powerful impact of that for those guys. And I think it's so easy to just take sides, right? It's so easy to say, I'm on this side, I'm on this side. It's just such a complex area. And I was going to ask as well, like, in that same vein, and you had mentioned some basic lift numbers that you might like, but do you have a short list of KPIs that you tend to utilize? And I know there's different positions as well, but maybe just give an example or two from a couple of positions, what kind of KPIs you're looking at, what types of things you like to see across the board for your guys.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I think we can have the largest impact on is like speed power or speed acceleration. And we just do a very basic like 10-yard start to assess that. It's very general, and I know it's not the end all be all for top end speed, but it kind of works in our setting, in our circumstance. We get guys in the first day, and the next day, they're like full go. So it's like you roll the dice when you start making your assessments a little more provocative, because we don't have 5 days until the next training session. These guys will be in games within a handful of days after they arrive. So I think the first thing that we do is like our speed acceleration, metrics, and that's through the 10-yard start assessments. Talking to a lot of our skill coaches or our base running coordinator, and picking out guys that we value organizationally that we think are runners that are good runners in the game. So I think that's one of our top things that we look for, because I think that's where we can make the largest impact. How we make that impact with those is, the same thing with the strength conversation. There's a ton of different ways we can go about it, depending on every individual case, whether it's, body composition and, strength numbers, their running mechanics, their ability, from just ability to have patience during the acceleration, phase. And, I know sometimes when you're just testing 10 yards, guys, mechanics for that 10 yards look nothing like what they would look like if they were running a 30 or a 40. So it's like, how do we view that or help? I guess mainly just help with that skill set. I think that's one of the biggest things that we look at. After that, it's kind of like a scouting profile. We talk with our the meetings that we have about our players. It's how do we see this player or his skill set helping our major league team win? And there's like the five tools of like a players like uh, speed, power, hitting for average, fielding and defense, and arm strength. And it's like all of those tools can be broken down into their own metrics that every organization or whoever uses to assess those. So talking to our field staff and coordinators and front office, like how is this player going to help our major league team? Because not many players have all five of those tools, and sometimes a guy may have like a hitting for power tool, and his defense may be terrible, and this is like a very real scenario. His defense is terrible. This is a guy that needs to work on agility and his speed. Uh, like if we were to strip this guy down because his maybe body composition isn't ideal for speed and moving around, and then all of a sudden he loses some power. Well, now what's this player worth? We may have affected his career negatively. So those are things that I make sure I'm very clear with when we have those conversations. Hey, just to let you know, if this is something that we're really looking to do, are we willing to take a risk of, because we're working with these guys in season. It's not like we have a full off season where we have contact with these guys. So yeah, it's like one of those things that we kind of take with a grain of salt and figure out essentially the best way that we can go about making those changes. And then essentially suppleness, that's a very broad category. We look at tissue quality and injury history. What type of issues have they had in the past, if any? Essentially the mobility screenings that we do from medical side. We don't really have any like assessment protocols, I would say, from the strength conditioning side. I'm a big believer that our medical side, we spend like a full day of gaining all these mobility assessments, anthropometric measures. So like, let's just use them. Like, if you find out what the numbers mean, you can make a large impact without spending man hours of, FMSing 200 athletes. That takes some time. So I think those are some of the, I'll say the top things that we look for when guys come into camp. And as far as like the position specific, skills specific, it could be individual for every guy based on, essentially the scouting on that player, what they see him, how they see him impacting our major league team. So, we as physical preparation coaches, we always have goals. Like we want guys to be lean. We want guys to be strong, fast, explosive. But sometimes it's like, okay, well, if rotational power, hitting for power is this guy's skill set, we want to make sure that we spend some time on his weaknesses, but we don't spend enough time to where it starts to take away from his strengths. And I think that's, one of the biggest things that, in any field court sport, you have to look at. You can't always be caught up on the weaknesses. And like I said, that instance where, man, this guy's slow and he loses some weight and, he gets a little bit leaner, but, he's not hitting 30 home runs anymore. And, and his defense did improve drastically to make him, an all-star. So it's like, you gotta pick your battles there.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by SimpliFaster. That's such a fascinating give and take. I mean, I was just thinking, it's like, how many sports are there where you hit something and you have to be strong and hit something a long way, but then you also have to run and be agile and quick, right? Like, it's a little bit different. And compared to, I was thinking like decathlon in track, like you could get really big and be good at the throws, but then have fun in the 400 and the mile. Like it's
exactly.
It's cool. It's cool how that strategy exists from the physical prep perspective. I would imagine too, a lot of players, especially if it's like their identity is like a home run hitter, they might be kind of resistant to getting like, oh, you have to play better defense, you got to get lean. Like I feel like you would probably run into some issues there, maybe from a psychological perspective on their own role and trying to turn those dials or those levers, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you always have to be careful in the wording when you're having those conversations with the players, but it's never like, you wouldn't say like, hey, you're a complete liability out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, you're
and I
terrible.
think that's,
Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, that's why I said, like, it's not like we can find they can find a place to put this guy. And yes, we will work on some things that will help improve that skill. But like I said, we don't want to, I would say like in the case from that hitting, perspective, if we want to work purely on defense and speed, well, that's part of the pie that we're taking out of that guy's day. The strength coach at the affiliate would grab that guy, when he shows up to the park, maybe get him warmed up, take him out in the field and do some agility work or speed work. Well, okay, well that 15 to 20 minute session has to be accounted for. If he's losing out on cage time, or he's losing out on maybe even like actual defensive, work, like infield work with one of the other coordinators, it's like, okay, the guy needs to get faster, but we need to find a way to make sure that we do it in very, monitored and specific volumes, not to interfere with this guy playing at the game at 7 o'clock at night. And in the minor league setting, we are in player development. It is development, but what they do at 7 o'clock every night matters. We could be getting this guy stronger and faster, but robbing Peter to pay Paul, like you're getting all this work in before the game. So game time, by the fifth inning, man, this guy's spent, in a 3-hour game. Well, that's going to affect his performance, not just in that night, but also long term. So that's where, especially, like I said, dealing with these guys in season, it's kind of, walking a fine line of, what we're looking for from a developmental standpoint. Exactly. What is this individual's KPIs like from a scouting standpoint? Like, what do we see him having the greatest impact on our major league team? And then how can we attack those things? And like I said, the weaknesses and the little details, like we can always find ways of kind of picking here and there, micro dosing things from like a speed standpoint. If that's something that he needs, like we don't need to go out and have a 30-minute speed session. And, sometimes that's what is when a strength coach or a physical preparation coach or the skill coach has in mind of this guy needs to get faster. Sometimes that's like the thing, like, all right, he needs to go out and have this 30-minute session where he's doing cone drills or, doing max effort sprints. And it's like, okay, let me talk to the manager to see if he's in the lineup tonight at 7 o'clock, because, this guy may be a little fatigued going into that game.
Yeah, right on. With the agility too, you had mentioned before, so many ways to measure it. And if you're tasked with getting athletes a little bit more faster or agile, are there any I mean, I suppose there's a lot of tests you could do. Is there any kind of ways that you're quantitatively like assessing that as you go along? Like, I guess the 10-yard dash would be like the basic one, right? Like, but is there any other things you're kind of doing to measure that progress as those guys go along?
Yeah, we do the 5-10-5 basic pro agility. I think that it's a very comparable test, meaning that there are a ton of numbers that you can compare guys to. And there's always like subtle differences in like the protocol, how you make them do it. Like, we use a laser timing system to do it. So, it's not the stopwatch that we're relying on. And I think it's a good tool for, visually assessing as well, because I think there's a lot to be taken out of that, because it can also be used as like a measure of strength. Like because of the time that we have our players, we don't do like a max, like a 3-rep max or a 1-rep max test. We kind of use training loads in season to assess, like guys, strength abilities. The only time we may push guys to like that point where we want to really get like a measure would be like in our off season. If we have like a camp going on in like January and we have some guys, and we can be a little bit more aggressive, because we know that, there's a few months before the season, but we don't like to do like a full-on strength test that first day, because like I said, these guys are going through full workouts, and if you're in an environment where guys are getting fired up, there can be some soreness and stiffness, residuals the following day, which if we bury a guy and we take away from his skill work and now he looks sloppy on the field, like that's the coach's first perception. Man, this guy looks like crap, like he's not moving around well. It's like, well, maybe it's because he just did like a max effort squat test the day before. So the 5-10-5 I think is a very good, you see the ability of the players to be able to decelerate, let you know how guys move from like I said, watching, and then just the numbers in general. You can kind of get more of a large scale picture. It's not extremely specific, and like I said, there's a ton of different assessments that you could use. That's just something that like I said, we've used in the past, and I have some comparable numbers to kind of look at and go off of.
Yeah, simple and to the point. And like you said, I feel like since there's not really a perception involved, just the qualitative watching, or yeah, the qualitative watching how the athlete does it and executes it as their numbers improve probably is really valuable too to see and communicate to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's an easy drill because we can also use that. Like if we were to be doing some type of agility work in the off season, which I will say I really don't spend a lot of time doing traditional agility because I think there are other things that we can attack that will help that. But that may be one of those like simple things that I'll throw in, more so just to get guys comfortable with like that movement pattern, being able to accelerate, laterally break, change directions. Like I said, a very simple task.
Yeah, in not doing traditional, like I think when I think of traditional agility, I think of like cones and ladders and mini hurdles and maybe that guy with the quick feet running around in circles and stuff and then catching a pass. But like, what are some of the key like positions that you're training in for lateral movement? Like, what if you're training an athlete's lateral and change of direction? What are some cornerstone things that you're doing there?
Like I said, I think maybe just looking for body positioning, looking for guys' ability to, get in a good athletic position and decelerate their body. Like I said, we have a very large variety of body types, and every position's demands are slightly different. Our outfielders, may not need to do as much decelerative work as more so as like the infielders. So it's I think more so looking for how they are able to, get their hips in a good position where they're, not overreaching, they're not extending. Because agility is really weird in baseball too. Like if you watch someone like the best defenders, let's just say like you're watching like your middle infielders, rarely when they field the ball are they coming to like this exact stop position. A lot of times it's so fast that, it's like one fluid motion. They're fielding, turning, getting that ball out of the glove and letting it go. They're not like coming to a complete break. So I think that's where as in things that I look at, from an order of what we really want to work on and how much of the volume that we have. Baseball doesn't require like a ton of agility, in that sense. And, I think it actually, like for me, it more so comes down to like a mobility standpoint. We see a lot of players with really, I'll say tight hips, and that's a general term, players that lack internal rotation. And if they lack internal rotation, that's usually saying something along the lines of, hey, something is wrong either from a tissue standpoint or from a bony process, So we'll kind of look at the hip internal rotation numbers that we get. There's some brief assessments that we can do, some of the stuff I'll use from PRI, just like the extension drop test and adduction drop test, just to kind of see where a guy is at on a daily basis. That may help to see. I think mobility plays more of a role in agility in baseball than, going out and doing a ton of different cone drills and ladder drills, because that stuff may be good for some younger population or kids that don't have those motor patterns yet. But, you're taking away from the pie somewhere. So it's like, all right, if we're going to spend 30 minutes on agility, what are we cutting out? Because we don't have these full days to throw in all these extra things. Or maybe the lift suffers, or maybe their speed work suffers, or their tempo work isn't that great. Or, maybe they're just sore and fatigued and the travel, was terrible and the nutrition was terrible, like all these lifestyle hygiene factors. So like I said, when there's all these things, all these different variables, I try to look at like what's like the most important thing that we need to attack. And I think agility in the sense of what, traditionally is described as agility kind of falls way down on the totem pole there. And that may just be me and, people may disagree, but.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, the traditional agility is really it's really no different than just kids playing in the playground. Like you need to do it early on, I guess. Well, play on the playground. I guess you could do a lot of the typical agility stuff if you want to when you're a kid, but like, no, I what you were saying too is giving the players the mobility. It makes me think of like a tenet of the Jay Schrader system, and it's just like give the players the physical capabilities, and the brain will figure out how to use that and move better. And rather than just training someone in a compromised position over and over again where they can't get into the internal rotation PRI, I've seen the exact same thing. Like my tennis guys that have trouble moving laterally, the internal rotation is always a very difficult thing. Like it's like they the picture you have of someone who makes you happy in the squat rack because they can get their knees out and do all those things, but then to be able to actually move laterally. So I right on there. I think that's great stuff, Pat. Well,
Appreciate it. Yeah, like I said, I think there's a very broad spectrum that you have to look at, and there's all kinds of ways of going about it and means and methods. And like I said, even using like the example of PRI, sometimes that there's schools of thought that's like the end all be all, and I think that's a modality. We use some of the Jay Strader's like extreme ISO holds, and I'll say some of the guys that we have can't even hold the lunge position for over a minute. So it's
ouch.
yeah, that's why I said. But it's fun to kind of see how that, because it does, like, those are means that we can use that may address like a common theme, like opening up the hips or giving strength to the hamstrings, in a isometric state, which is kind of what we're looking for. That's kind of some of the basis behind some of the PRI stuff that we use. I know there's a lot more in-depth anatomy and posture that kind of goes along with it, but we just look at, like I said, a general, a very broad spectrum of things, and how we can make the biggest impact. And for every player, that their needs may be different.
Oh, right on. Yeah, I do think a lot of those systems really run together, and I like how you mentioned that. I think with PRI, it makes me think about what Justin Moore had just talked about. It's like the PRI stuff is awesome, but if you can find like a linchpin where it's just maybe even a coaching cue or something where you don't have to tell the player they're deficient and fix it without getting them on the table or something like that, then that's where it's at. But I've learned a ton from PRI, and it's kind of become a big part of my assessment system in the process here. So yeah, I think that's it for the questions I had for you today, Pat. This was a really great talk. I really, I don't get to talk to a lot of baseball performance coaches often, and every time I do, I just learn a lot of really cool things. So thanks for filling me in with the ins and outs of your program, and I really enjoyed it.
No problem. I appreciate you having me, Joel.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode. We appreciate you guys listening and being on board with us throughout this 130. It's crazy. Every benchmark is just like 10 more, 10 more. I've learned so much, so many awesome coaches. This has been a huge blessing for me, and I hope it has been for you as well. Our sponsor, SimpliFaster.com, they are rock stars in the sports tech space. They have the Freelap timing system, K-Box, GymAware, muscle stimulators, force plates, everything that you could possibly think of to assess an athlete in a practical situation. You're going to see that in their store, and they do just an awesome job of customer service as well as their blog and bringing great information. So check them out, and then we'll be back next week with another great guest. We'll see you then.